My name is Dana Ostimo, and I'm the founder and CEO of Deposit a Gift, and we are a crowdfunding platform local to New York City. We've actually been around for 5 years. We started off as a cash gift registry service, so we sort of existed almost before most crowdfunding platforms did, and then we've evolved as a business. About a year into being in business, just like a little nutshell on our entrepreneurial journey, people started to naturally use us for fundraising. Raising money for schools, for friends with medical needs, memorial funds, and this just started happening naturally, and then it was kind of happening at the same time that it started to become a thing on the internet with other sites, and so that's how we grew and evolved. So we actually have two aspects of our platform, but today I'm here to talk about the crowdfunding aspect. And as Eric talked about, he said we are a donation-based fundraising platform, which is mostly true. That's what I'm here to talk about today. We actually do have a rewards component, so you can do anything with it. We are one of the crowdfunding sites that you can raise money for anything that matters to you. So we've got essentially two sweet spots. One is with individuals, memorial funds, medical expenses, group gifts, like anything kind of personal that you might see, like, you know, people posting on Facebook, like, oh, help my friend do such and such. The second sweet spot is with organizations. So small to medium-sized nonprofits, schools, religious organizations, that kind of fundraising. So we really do both. My background is actually in marketing and advertising before I began a startup. So a lot of what I bring to bear on the business, I've been running it now for, well, we've been live for about 5 years, and I've been working on it for probably 6.5. It's just a lot of coaching, right? So that's why I do these talks now, because I'm able to really share with you a lot of experience of how we've helped a lot of users raise money and do their campaigns. That said, what I'd love to do is get a sense of who's in the room and what brought you here today, because this is actually the first donation-based crowdfunding workshop that Crowds Unite has done. Mostly things have evolved around like rewards-based campaigns, and so this is kind of new for this group, and you know, it is bringing kind of an interesting mix of people. So if it's okay with you guys, we're gonna put you on the spot. We're gonna go around the room, just say your name, whatever you want to say, basically your name, where you're from, company if you want to, and why you're here, what you're hoping to learn, because that's going to really help me tailor the presentation. I really want to make sure that you guys get something meaty out of this, right? You should be able to walk away and, you know, feel like you could do a campaign or some sort of tangible next step that you were hoping to get out of it, not a bunch of fluff. So, so what I heard is, am I talking too loud, by the way? How's the mic?
That's good.
It's good? Okay. What I heard is we got a lot of people in the room who are working with nonprofits, starting nonprofits, a lot of like socially based entrepreneurialism in many ways, right? And a lot of people also just trying to understand what crowdfunding is. So that's good, because that's really what this presentation was about, right? My goal is to kind of level the playing field and just make sure everyone's on the same page about what crowdfunding is in general. And we did sort of a bent towards donation-based, but quite frankly, a lot of the principles are the same when it comes to rewards-based crowdfunding. I just left off the slides about, you know, what makes a good reward and, you know, don't let it bankrupt you when you need to fulfill it, that kind of thing. I think you guys are going to have a lot of questions, which is going to be good, so I'm hoping for an interactive discussion. Please feel free to, you know, raise your hand, and I'll try and kind of do it in pockets so we can keep going. Before I forget, in case people need to leave throughout, my contact information is in the back. There's also a postcard there with some top 10 tips and an offer code for an upgrade on our platform. And also just a little takeaways, like if there's if you remember anything, here are 10 things to remember. You can even grab it now if you want to, you know, take notes. So please feel free to grab that information. Yeah, Eric, if you want to pass those around, it's completely fine. Grab that information and feel free to reach out. One question I have for all of you. Has anyone in this room ever run a crowdfunding campaign? You have. Okay, what platform did you use?
I used Indiegogo 4 years ago.
You used it 4 years ago, okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? What have you done?
I used Kickstarter.
You used Kickstarter, so it was more like a creative entrepreneurial project. Anyone else? What have you done?
Indeed.
You did Indiegogo. Okay, great. And so how many people in the room have donated or contributed to a crowdfunding campaign? Okay, great. So probably about half the room at least has experience interacting with a campaign, half the room not. Most people here, I assume, know what it is, but even if people don't, I'm not going to make anyone feel silly. We'll just start off by leveling the playing field and making sure that everyone at least knows what it is. I want to talk a lot about how to run a campaign, how to create and run it so that you could actually walk away with some tangible steps. And then ideal uses for donation-based crowdfunding, and then some creative ways that it could work. All right. It looks like there's just a delay here. So one thing, in case any of you guys have to, go back to your organizations and have internal conversations, which happens a lot, right? You send a representative. Some people are sold on the idea of crowdfunding, and some people aren't. So I think one thing, just it's good to be armed with some statistics. It's interesting because probably what's made crowdfunding famous are more like the creative and entrepreneurial projects, so like the Kickstarters of the world, right? You'll often even hear people say, oh, I'm going to do a Kickstarter. It's starting to become a noun. They don't necessarily mean they're going to use Kickstarter. They just mean they're going to do a crowdfunding campaign. I call them like the Kleenex of crowdfunding, right? And so for a lot of the people who are in this room and the types of things that you've talked about wanting to do, that's actually not the platform that you would use. And that's also, a lot of what Crowds Unite is for. Alex and Eric and the great work that they do is helping you figure out what's going to be the right platform for you, right? So they're more focused on creative and entrepreneurial projects. Certain sites are more niche. We're a site that's very general that you can use, for anything. So part of what you're going to figure out is, what is the right platform for you and sort of what the criteria is to evaluate. But I think a key thing to note is that you might think that the biggest use of crowdfunding is creative and entrepreneurial projects, but actually the largest growing sector is with social causes and donation-based crowdfunding. So it may be a little less sexy and it may not get as much of media attention, but this is really where the growth is going, so you guys are all in the right place. Crowdfunding is really something that allows you to raise money and do something for your passions. I mean, most people touched on that as they went around the room, that they're doing something that they're really passionate about and care about. And so when we get, a little bit deeper into the presentation, we'll get into some very specific use cases. I pulled a lot of case studies just so you could see, almost try and see yourself in some other campaigns. But the idea is just, it can really be for any type of category, right? And especially in the donation-based space, nonprofit work of any kind of realm is quite popular, though I will say, anything where there's heightened emotion is often going to do better, right? That's not to say that a nonprofit that may seem to have a drier subject matter couldn't do well. It's often about how do you find that story. I was doing a workshop last summer and we had an organization in the room that does free burials. And they've been doing it for 100 years. And so they raised their hand and they said, we just don't even know what to do. We do what we do it really well. In the niche that we're in, people know us. But who wants to talk about death and how much money it costs, to bury somebody who's indigent? So we ended up having a little interesting, they got lucky, they got a brainstorm in the room of people, everyone really kind of glommed onto it. And we came out with a really cool story. And sometimes that's what it takes. You gotta get outside of yourself. I often recommend bringing in pizza, some interns, some coffee, and just doing a quick brainstorming session because you want to find a story that's outside of your norm. And so for them, what we came up with was the fact that everyone in the room was shocked that there were people who didn't have someone to bury them, right? Because if you're typically talking to a middle-class room of people, of a similar nature. This happened to be a Jewish professionals room, and that's what their focus is. People were shocked. What do you mean there's nobody to bury you, right? Because most of us have someone who would look after that kind of thing. And, it costs, $3,800 to do that. That's an awful lot of money. And so there was sort of this idea of a brand awareness campaign, almost like a shock value. And anyways, they've since run a campaign with us. They did it this fall through Giving Tuesday, and they raised $30 what are they at, like $34,000. They've never done anything like that before. And I think it was really a credit to the fact that they came up with a really engaging, emotional story, and they also really listened and put together a pretty gangbusters marketing plan. So just like a little anecdote for some of you who might be thinking, like, how would we go about this? There's really always a way, and we're going to talk about what those principles are, the things you need to start thinking about to make your campaign something that would engage people to give. Okay. So, sorry, we'll get the ball rolling now. I always like to ask, which campaign would you give to? Right? Now, a lot of you in the room actually do know what crowdfunding is and sort of have been around it or interacted with it, but this is kind of part of that level the playing field thing I was talking about. At its very nature, actually I'm going to ask, if you had to define what crowdfunding is, how would you define it? Who wants to take a guess? Be brave, come on. If you had to describe it to somebody who, like, you said, oh, I'm thinking of doing a crowdfunding campaign, and they said, what? Because just so you know, only about 5% of the U.S. population actually knows what it is. Like, we live in New York, you know, you guys are here, but most people don't know. So what do you think it is?
I'd say getting small donations from regular people.
Mm-hmm. It's a good way to think about it. And you?
Oh, I'd say it's, using your networks and using their networks in a viral kind of way to engage people to donate to your cause.
Those are all both good definitions. What I like to say is that crowdfunding at its very core is just online social fundraising, right? So the innovation is not necessarily in taking donations online when you're an organization, right? Because most organizations have been doing that for quite some time, and this is typically what it looks like. Right, but if you are not an organization, let's say you're like a startup nonprofit entrepreneur or someone who's just trying to help someone, you could look at that and say, well, the equivalent would be either like a PayPal page or even just passing a hat at church or something like that, right? This is basically like the old school way of doing it. I call this a sterile transactional donation page, right? So there's nothing engaging about it. It's clunky. It doesn't tell your story. It's not socially enabled. There's nothing transparent about it or anything that would sort of motivate the herd mentality. This is where we've been, and this is where we're going, right? So to your point, it's all about the social aspect, but also that engaging story. So what you're trying to do is create a campaign that is easy to give to and compelling to share. Right? And that's what you get, and that's why you use a platform like ours or whatever, you might choose, something that looks like this, because it's not just about the processing, right? Crowdfunding is about marketing. And that's why also, you pay a little bit extra in fees. It's not just about like the credit card processing. You're trying to get something that's, I say like at its very core, you're just trying to get to your friends' friends' friends, right? You're trying to suck the juice out of your network and then turn those supporters into advocates to get to their friends, right? All right. So, again, as part of leveling the playing field, what are sort of the key components? What makes a crowdfunding site, right? So, you've got the goal, the thermometer, the recent activity feed, the contributor count, and you've got the social media buttons. These are the things that they're the tools that power the herd, if you will. But not on their own, and that's what we're going to get to. So, anatomy of a crowdfunding site, just so you can kind of see, what it looks like. Every site has its own layout. A lot of them look a little bit more like knockoffs of Kickstarter. Ours is a little bit different. But the idea is that you're going to have some kind of multimedia, some image or video. You're going to have those features I was talking about, the recent activity feed, the goal, the thermometer, and you're going to be, have something to tell your story. And it's meant to be, colorful, engaging. That fun aspect, that personal aspect, it's actually really important, right? When you think about it, like your inner circle of key supporters, the people who love you, probably like your family and close friends, right, or your like board members, they'll jump through hoops for you. They'll donate in whatever mechanism you give them, right? But those are your advocates. Those are the people that you start with. Those are the ones you want to give a strong tool to help beat the drum for you, right? Because you as the campaign organizer, you got to start thinking of yourself as like the conductor of an orchestra, right? So there's a lead, and even if you might have a team, maybe you have a team at your organization, but you might also be a solo person doing it, you still have to create like a team around you. You have to create a group of people who are going to help make the noise. And that's how sort of that virality starts. You know, one of the big misnomers, and we'll get to the myths in a second, is that these things just like take off by themselves, right? Because that's what you hear in the media. Those are the stories that, you know, the Post or the Times write about. But the reality is first of all, those things most of the time do not happen by accident. Even if the campaign organizer gets interviewed and you hear them say like, I don't know what happened, it just took off. Total garbage, right? And actually, one of the reasons that I do these presentations is because I really want to help set you up for success. That's one, like a hallmark of our site. We offer really hands-on customer service, and we try to be really honest with people about how this works. It is not fair to you to make you think that you just have to create the site, and as long as it has a Facebook like button on it, that it's going to move itself. It does not work that way, and that's why the percentage of crowdfunding site campaigns have a much higher fail rate, because people aren't really armed with the right information. And I think what it does is it sort of hampers your preparation, because you don't really know what you're supposed to do before you get started, and you think it's supposed to be kind of easy, like, you know, the puppy video or kitty video that goes around. You know, these things, that's not how it works. And really, most campaigns are pretty localized in many ways, right? Yes, there was the potato salad campaign and the Pebble Watch, and those things will go bonkers. Most campaigns aren't like that. Most campaigns have like a pretty niche specific audience, and that's okay, and that's actually can be to your benefit, because it can really help you hone in on and find the people who are going to be super psyched about what you're doing. And even if it's not the whole world, it can be a pretty considerable amount of people to help you get going. And your campaign, you want to set it up to motivate those kind of people. So I often get a lot of FAQs. Again, this is one of the last kind of leveling the playing field things, but around, you know, detailed nitty-gritty stuff, like, because one thing that's happened in this space is that there have become a lot of options, right? There are a lot of crowdfunding sites out there, and there are big name ones, there are medium-sized ones, there are smaller ones, and, you know, people are kind of confused. And there's a woman named Rose Spinelli. I don't know if you know Rose. She writes for crowdsourcing.org. She's like an expert in the field. And so we were talking one day, and she said, you know, what I find is that people email me all the time that they're having trouble. She calls it either like sifting or filtering. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what to look at. So what I did is I tried to come up with just a list to help you evaluate. So some things to note. Most of you in the room probably know this, but you know, there's two kinds of funding terminologies. You've got flexible funding and all or nothing. So all or nothing is what Kickstarter made famous. It means that you don't get to keep your money unless you hit your goal, right? Flexible funding means that you get to keep your money no matter what, meaning whether or not you hit your goal. One thing that people get confused about is there's still always a fee. So even saying you get to keep everything just means, you know, everything minus a little bit of a fee. That's for every platform. You're going to want to take a look at what deadlines look like or project approvals, right? Some sites only let you keep your campaign up for a certain amount of time. They might tell you have to define what that deadline is up front. Like our site's really flexible. Actually, we don't do that. There is a reason for that I will acknowledge, which is sense of urgency. But I actually think that you can build that into your marketing plan. So that's one thing to think about, because let's say you're working on a campaign that you actually want to be like a year-long initiative, right? Which some people might say, well, is that really crowdfunding? I would say yes, and that it really becomes reliant on your marketing plan and kind of coming up with those periods of time where you're going to reinvigorate it and get people to engage, because it's all call and response, right? But you want to know what you're getting into, because how sad if you get a campaign up, it's doing well, and then there's a blockade, and there's some sites in their FAQ say, oh, well, at 45 days it shuts down, and you can just make another one. But then your thermometer is 0 again, so that would be, kind of sad. So just know what you're getting into. Take a look at design aesthetic. Make sure it, is a site that's going to look and function the way you want. Those features that I was talking about before, sort of like what comprises a crowdfunding campaign, that's something you're going to find on every platform, right? But then what you need to do is, take a look at all of the different features and kind of specialty items that different sites offer, and that's going to help you find out like what is going to be the right site for you. Send an email to support, see how quickly they get back to you, what kind of service they offer, because crowdfunding is very much DIY, but part of maybe the difficulty in it is that people are kind of left to their own devices. So if you're someone who you might feel like you need a bit more support, then that might be something that you're going to look for. Ease of use for setup. Check out if you're going to get any sort of custom URL, because when you're thinking about your marketing, right, like your best ROI for marketing is going to be online, obviously, right? A click and a give. But depending on what you're working on, you might find that you need to utilize other marketing channels, right? Like you're from a theater company, and you guys might, like if we were talking, and one of the questions I often ask is like, okay, what's the size of your donor base list offline, and what is it online? And often with a lot of organizations, they've got a bigger list offline versus on. And so one of your strategic objectives for your campaign might be that you want to kind of move the needle, use the crowdfunding campaign to like get more people interacting with you online. And so you'd want to know, are they going to give you a URL that's kind of like gobbledygook, or is it going to be something custom that would translate really nicely to print? So those are things to keep in mind. And then other things, just like special features, right? Like I know Alex from Crowds Unite, a few months ago, they had the people from PubSlush here, right? Because their niche is all about like book publishing. And so they've got certain special features that are going to be around, like once you get your funding, how do you publish your book? We've got a few unique features. One of them is that we're the only crowdfunding site that has a ticket sales functionality built into our campaigns that feeds the thermometer. Because what we found is that for a lot of the organizations that we work with, they've been doing things like kind of a tried and true traditional way, and we help them sort of merge traditional offline events with the online world, right? So now you can sell tickets and solicit donations and sponsorships and all that stuff all in one place, and everything makes the thermometer rise. So a lot of small to medium-sized organizations really like that because it keeps everything in one place, versus what we've all experienced, like a nonprofit's going to put on an event. They usually take their WordPress site, they rip a page, they post a link to go here to buy your tickets, and a link to download this form, and a link to go here to donate, and it's really splintered and kind of, cumbersome. So that's the type of thing you want to look for in terms of like unique features, what's going to work for you. And then obviously the fees. You're going to want to see who charges for what and how. Yeah.
This is interactive.
Yeah,
I
please.
have a fashion designer. So what you're saying is we could actually have 4 or 5 fashion shows in major cities to raise money, have an event, make a combination thing.
Yeah. And that could be part of your marketing plan, is that you're going to use events as sort of a way to do the fundraising and, sell tickets. Because what if you get everything sponsored? So really the tickets is all just fundraising, and it's another excuse to get people to your site. Yeah. And then the way fees work for most platforms, really all, every site's got a platform fee and a credit card fee, right? Platform fees are how crowdfunding sites make money. Credit card fees are basically cost of doing business. So, the range out there, I would say like most sites are anywhere from like 5 to 9% plus credit card. We actually skew lower in our fees. Our fees range from 2 to 4% plus credit card. And actually the postcard that's back there has an upgrade code, so get you on the lowest fee for just total of 5.5, which is pretty low. All right. Does anyone have any other questions, like nitty gritty, what is crowdfunding kind of questions before we move on? No? So what makes a campaign successful? I was alluding before to these, the myths. You know, one of the biggest questions that we get to support is, I published my campaign, why isn't anyone giving to it? Alex, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to bring up is that lower rates of find a good site you check the ratings and crowd,
Yes, that is another.
self-support.
Yeah, I know, that's good. Alex's site is great. He's got all of their sites are there with ratings and stuff. Thanks, Alex. All right. So that's a big one. People are just not going to come to your site because it's on the internet. That, you know, and another piece of that that's very closely related is that people are not just, you know, benevolently trolling the internet to give you money. Kickstarter, I will say, is a different animal, right? That's a site that people actually do kind of go there to go shopping in a way. But what I would say is, for most of the types of things that you guys were talking about, and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way, it's not that what you're doing is not important or interesting, but it's typically hyper-focused to like a specific group of people. And for the most part, they're not going to be looking for you, right? That's why the marketing is so important. You have to go and find them. So often it's, you know, yes, there are certain campaigns that I think like Kickstarter is like the home for that, right? Because people are going shopping. But for most things, really it's so much less about the platform, right? And, you know, there's this whole sort of idea that, oh, the platform is going to bring you an audience. And when they promise you that, I mean, go look on the internet. There are a lot of really pissed off people who felt like kind of lied to. And I tell you that because the stuff takes work, right? It is very doable, and we're going to get to the second half of the presentation, which is going to teach you how to do that work. But it's really important for you to know that. This is not like create your site and sit back and the people come. Or so, as somebody I know says, that you put it up and pray. Can't do that either. All right, so just to kind of like recap why crowdfunding is more effective, right? It has to do with that visual aspect, right? So going beyond those key supporters that I was saying would give to you no matter how many hoops you made them jump through, right? But you've got to get beyond those people. So you've got to make it really easy for the people who love you to convince their friends that they should love you too, right? And when they can show the need and how their contribution will make a difference, that goes a long way. Because you have to remember, you've only got about 3 to 5 seconds to get someone's attention when they land on your site. So, headline, picture, first 2 to 3 sentences. Right? I mean, that's something that we often do for campaign organizers, is that will be a second set of eyes to review the site and help you fine-tune the text. Because, you know, the first time you write it, you're often still like very in love with your idea, and it's so long, and nobody cares. I mean, that's just the hard truth, right? So you're looking for like a nice medium between what you want and what your givers want. So you need to give them a gratifying experience, right? But at the end of the day, you want them to give quickly and share quickly. And so how can you facilitate that? The platform should do that, but then also how you set up the site is going to inform that, so that it's as engaging as possible. So, and this actually probably applies a little bit more to nonprofits, especially like if you've got a website, right? So how do you sort of integrate your campaign with your website, kind of a click over? But sometimes, especially for nonprofits, what they haven't quite figured out yet, but they're starting to because they're hearing this crowdfunding thing, is that you need to make things easy for people to get them to do something for you, right? So not a lot of clicks, not having to read anything that you don't want to, that sharing should be really simple, right, and easy, and that the campaign page should speak for itself. So I like to think of it like good networking, right? So let's say you're trying to apply for a job, or like I spend half my day networking and getting introduced to organizations. So if you find someone who can introduce you, first of all, you got to have really good follow-up and consistent messaging, right? But secondly, if you write the email for them to make the introduction happens a lot faster, right? Versus if you leave someone to their own devices and they have to like think up what they should say about you, they'll almost never do it, right? So that's the same idea with these campaigns is you're giving someone a tool to make it really easy for them to share you. Okay. So what does it take to put a campaign together from beginning to end? This is part of that leveling the playing field thing, since almost everyone in the room hadn't built a campaign before. So just kind of breaking it down. And most of these steps, just so you know, I don't really think live in isolation, but you've got the first part of it, which is setting up your site, right? And one thing to look at is make sure that the site that you choose allows you to continue editing. Some sites might freeze you out, others let you keep going. Like our site, you can edit everything. The only thing you can't edit is how much money you've raised, right? Meaning you can't take the money off the thermometer, which you'd be surprised. Sometimes people ask us to do that. But you can change the background, the text, the pictures, put updates, all that kind of thing. So, but the setup, like by and large, is the beginning of your process, right? The sharing aspect is really marketing, right? It's how you get your campaign out there. And when you think of it on a continuum, like if you were to map out what your campaign looked like how long you're working on it, you know, you might have a couple weeks of setup, a couple weeks of soft launch, maybe it's 4 to 6 weeks of like full force, you know, campaigning, and then the wrap up process. But I would say that like the marketing part of it starts even when you're on setup or even when it's just an idea. Meaning you start talking to people about it, because it takes a while to get the word out to people and let them know that this is something you're going to be doing and that you're going to need them, right? Because you're recruiting your band, right? And so you got to start talking to everyone you know and picking their brain, because you're trying to find who knows who. And like I can't tell you, I was in a meeting with, I don't know, executive director of some organization, and we were talking about how she was going to, you know, get people to market it in, you know, different vehicles. And it took until the end of the meeting for her to realize that one of her board members used to be a journalist at NBC, right? Which you would think actually would be something you would like know off the back of your hand, but actually you don't. Like, again, this would be like good networking, right? So when I get introduced to someone and someone says, oh, I like what you do, oh, I know some people who work at some organization, send me an email. I'll send them a script to introduce me, but I also give them a bulleted list of the 4 kinds of people I want to meet. Because people just can't remember. We all know too many people, right? But if I say, I want to meet people who sit on boards, I want to meet executive directors at nonprofits, development directors, people who sit on the PTA who are involved in, you know, leadership positions, then they go, oh, I know this person, this person, this person, this person. So it's the same thing when you're starting to think about how you want to market your campaign. You got to start planting the seed of like, I want to know someone who has more than 10,000 Twitter followers, right? I want to know 5 bloggers who write about children's clothing or Japanese cooking or whatever your niche might be, right? I want to know a journalist at the Huffington Post and at the New York Times, right? You've got to be like really, really specific. So the earlier you can start talking about that and kind of laying the foundation for what your marketing plan will look like, the better for you, because these things take time. Collecting and acknowledging, that's just like people donating, right, the processing. But the acknowledgement part, I think, is really key, especially, again, like it's different in the donation space because you often have organizations. If you think about how campaigns typically run in a traditional sense, people typically wait until the end to say thank you, right? I'm going to recommend that you have an appreciation strategy, and that it actually be part of your marketing plan. And the appreciation strategy is because it's actually an excuse to turn a supporter into an advocate, right? People get really lazy about thank you notes, right? I can't tell you how often people say, well, doesn't your system send a receipt? Yes, our system sends a receipt, and actually, we've got a custom receipt tool where you can put a personalized message in it, you can make it multimedia, but that's still automated, right? Crowdfunding, if you write anything down, crowdfunding is a tool to work your network, right? People get confused by the crowd in crowdfunding, and they think it's just this like mass play. But actually, it's a relationship tool. And sometimes it's a mass play, like sometimes you gotta do a Facebook post. Oh, every day you should do a Facebook post. And sometimes you're gonna be sending out mass emails, but you're also gonna be sending personal emails. Now, part of what we're gonna talk about is like, how do you create a system so that this doesn't bog you down, right? So you're gonna write one thank you script, and you're gonna have that in the can. And every time somebody contributes and they get your automated receipt, within 24 hours, you're going to send them a personal note. Because they just did the hard part and they gave you their money. Now you want them to share. And so the excuse is I'm thanking you, but what you're trying to get them to do is to share. Yes?
Can I just say, as someone who's donated to campaigns, that when I don't get thanked and it like weeks go on, I feel like they didn't notice that they didn't care. And it really rubbed me the wrong way. So, supporting what you're saying.
Yeah, and you know, and when you do it, not only does it, I say like curb buyer's remorse, but it also makes you want to tell people, which is the whole point. Otherwise, how, you know, and then people say, well, I don't understand why my campaign died. Well, because you didn't cultivate your network. And cashing out is redeeming your money, and just, you know, check out the sites that you're thinking of using, and what you want to do is know, you know, how the cash out process works, right? So do they let you get your money whenever you want? Do they have a controlled time period when you can get it? That would be something important to know. Same with the data on the people who are giving to you. Are you allowed to export that information along the way? Do you have to wait until the end? Do they never give you access to it? Like for our system, you can cash out anytime you want, and you have access to the data throughout the entire time, right? Names, emails, addresses, what they contributed to, that kind of thing. But not every site's like that. So, and that may be fine for you. You just have to know what you're getting into. Okay. But first, you know, this is really one of my favorite slides. Who's in charge? You need to make sure that you've got a point person on your campaign. Now, that doesn't mean that your entire life turns into crowdfunding for the duration, but what it means is that you have somebody who's in charge, right? Because you do need to nurture it on a daily basis. Did you have a question?
Nope.
And if you're, you know, if you're an individual doing it, then obviously it's you. But if you're a team of people or you work at an organization, you want to make sure that somebody has said, you know, I'm it, like I'm in charge. So just some things to kind of keep in mind of what it takes to be a successful campaign. So clear goals and purpose, explaining why the cause is important, right? Like, tell me why it matters if I give you my money. That you have a marketing roadmap, like actually on paper, that you've thought it through, and that you have a good, solid appreciation strategy, which, by way of what you've said, a lot of people don't. So this is kind of like a checklist for when you set up your campaign. You want to ask yourself these questions, and if you don't necessarily meet this criteria, go back to the drawing board, right? So do you have engaging visuals, like at least one, just something to brand what you're doing or put a face on who you're helping? Is your text brief, well organized, no typos, right? You have to remember you're trying to create a sense of credibility, not only just for the first layer of people who give, but then again, when people share, like, I'm not going to give to a site that's got typos, because I think that person has no attention to detail. All right. Are they making a clear, compelling case? Some sites allow you to do a suggested donation amount, which can be a great way to just make it like a slicker, faster giving experience. So if you can do that, definitely do. think about what the goal is going to be. That can be a much longer conversation, but that's part of marketing, is kind of figuring out where you want to set that number at, and then communicating a sense of urgency.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
With setting the goal, often like you have your goal for the campaign, right? But often you have bigger goals for what you're doing. Is it confusing, or is it okay in the language of when you're talking about your campaign? So have your goal is the immediate goal, but in the language say, but if we reach this benchmark,
if we raise more than this, we can do this. If we raise more than this, we can do that. I think that's good. I mean, the reality is not everyone's going to read that far down. That's why we did our layout the way we did, kind of modular, so that the most important information of headline, picture, first few sentences is visible, and because really what you want people to do is land on your campaign, give and move on and share it.
Yeah.
That's sort of the purpose, but there are people who actually are going to want more detail, and so yeah, you absolutely should share with that, because that could motivate people. And if you surpass your initial goal, it may be that you use that as a way to start talking about our original goal was $10,000 by the end of the month, but we raised it in 2 weeks. Help us keep up the momentum and double it. Here's what we're going to do with that, and it's it was already there, so it's clearly the truth and credible, part of your thought process. And then, communicating a sense of urgency. Why should they give to you today and not tomorrow? If you can't answer that question, you're not ready to launch. You want to create a campaign that people can basically wrap their arms around, right? See, smell, and taste. They really feel like it's visceral, right? They want to be a part of it. So I think something that's really cool about crowdfunding is that, yes, you want to raise money, but it can actually do more for you than just raising money. And this is something that I would actually encourage a lot of you to think about when you're in the planning stages. What are you trying to get out of your campaign, right? So for a lot of organizations, they want to grow their email list. For a lot of organizations, they're looking for engagement, meaning they've got a pretty big email list or social media following, but only a really small percentage of people actually take any action, right? And so they're trying to grow their numbers from that perspective. Maybe you are doing something completely new, and so this is a brand awareness campaign. For the few of you who talked about actually doing products and services, perhaps you're using this as a way to do pre-sales. So there's a lot of different things you could be trying to get out of it, but this is not just, passing a hat or using a PayPal button. This is it's a marketing platform, and so you want to think about what you want that to be, because it will drive how you go about your campaign. So for example, the reason we're talking about donation-based is because a lot of what you guys are doing is kind of karmic crowdfunding, right? People are giving because there's a feel-good. But even with organizations, sometimes it doesn't hurt to have a little incentive, We had a school that decided to do one reward. And because they took a step back and said, okay, well, we've got pretty good engagement, but what we want to do is get people to give at higher ticket values. And so we're just going to offer one reward for anyone who gives at $180 or more. And they actually advertised that in their picture. And it had a big impact on their average ticket, right? Other organizations have not very big email lists, and so they kind of have to backdoor it. And so they do postcards where they advertise their campaign and make a case for why they should give online and include the link, right? And then kind of send them to the website, and then that's how they start capturing their email list. So there's just a variety of things. You know better, obviously, than we do what else you're trying to accomplish, but you want to think about that. Maybe it's about more community engagement. You need something to talk about, right? It may be a way for you to showcase some pet projects. It kind of gets some new people involved. So think about those things, and that's going to help you with the setup and the marketing plan. But the key thing really just to take away is that your whole campaign hinges on the marketing, so don't skimp on that. You know, I like to think of it as doing a crowdfunding campaign is kind of like getting a manicure, or for those of you who don't do that, you know, painting a wall, both of which I don't really like doing. But think about it this way. When you are getting a manicure or painting a wall, like, the majority of the time is actually spent on the preparation, right? Like, the nail woman is like grinding out your nails for, you know, 45 minutes. When she puts on the polish, it's like 30 seconds. You know, you're painting a wall, spend days priming the wall. When you actually put the paint on, it's, you know, an eighth of the time. If you don't do a good job in your preparation, your paint job is going to look like garbage. If you don't do a good job in preparing for your campaign, your execution is not going to go smoothly, right? So, like actually at lunch today, I did a lunch and learn for Savor the Success. So it was more of like a conversation focused towards entrepreneurs. And, you know, one of their questions was, you know, what's sort of like the key criteria to think about before launching a campaign? And, like, is there ever a reason to maybe not launch? And I said, and I think this is part of the preparation, like assessing your network, right? You need to make sure you've got a network that's going to carry you, and you really need to invest in those relationships, right? So it may seem a little disingenuous, but like if you know you want to do a campaign and you have a ton of people, but you haven't really been in touch with them in a while, you need to start saying hello, right? It's kind of like if you're looking for a job, right? Reach out to people on LinkedIn, Facebook, hey, how's it going? You don't say, oh, I'm looking for a job, right? You just start chatting and then it comes up naturally. Same thing. You need to have relationships. You also want to use social media as a way to, and I'll keep going here, as a way to create relationships. So, meaning, you've got your base of people who are sort of like your inner circle of supporters. And then maybe the next outward ring of like all your Facebook friends that you know, never really see a person. But then you're saying to yourself, well, I really could use a wider network. And, you know, I'm like, you're doing something with like say it again?
Dance Afghanistan.
Dance Afghanistan. Okay, so you've got kind of like two affinity groups who might care about what you're doing. People who care about Afghanistan or like that region, and also people who care about dance, right? So use social media to go make friends, right? Hashtags on Twitter, Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, right? And so you need to leave yourself enough time to start building some relationships so that you make friends with the bloggers who write about and care about what you're doing, the people who tweet about what you're doing and care about what you're doing. And you start making friends with them and you let them know, I'm working on this project. Oh, I'd love your opinion, or, oh, do you ever accept contributor pieces? I would love to write for you because everybody needs content, right? Making friends, building relationships. And that might sound like simple, but actually most people are really bad at that stuff. People who often do well with crowdfunding, I think, are good networkers who understand that, like, give and take and how you want to give to people first before you ask for something. But, you know, you have to be strategic about it. Right? Unless it just, I mean, I always tell, like, interns who work for us, when you're networking, you meet someone and then you try and figure out how you can do something for them before they do something for you. Which is strategic, but, like, it's also, I mean, if you get a little joy out of it, it's fun. So, marketing plan trifecta. We spent a whole lot of time on these advocates. This is how you're going to cultivate your people. Consistent communication. You just cannot be afraid to be putting out a lot of messaging, and you got to have a plan for how you're going to do it, right? How many newsletters you want to do a week? How much Facebook posting? What do you want to say? You can't just always be asking for money. You need to look for excuses, right? Interesting things that would make them actually want to hear from you, right? And then you need to have good follow-up. People suck at follow-up badly. You cannot when you're doing a campaign like this. You got to make a plan. You have to have a nudging calendar. You know, like when I have meetings with people, right after I meet with them, especially if I'm on the phone and I'm in front of my calendar, I'll like move that meeting invite, and I'll make a note, spoke with so-and-so on this date, follow up with them, blah, blah, blah. Because, nobody can remember all this stuff in their heads. You can't rely on that. You've got to have a system. Systems will make this much, much easier. And so, as you're coming up with your marketing plan, just like I had kind of that checklist. Oh, yes.
Sorry. So in following up with people, I don't know if this would be too abrasive or not, but if someone donated to your fundraiser, in addition to sending them a thank you email, if you thanked them publicly on Facebook and tagged them in it,
yeah, tag and thank method.
Would that be good?
Yeah, you should.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's also strategic. Is so what she's talking about is the tag and thank method that you can do on Facebook and Twitter, where you actually publicly call someone out. A lot of people like that because it's showing them appreciation,
Okay.
but also that feeds the herd mentality. It applies subtle social pressure, right? So you see in your feed oh, that person's giving, that person's giving, that person's giving, I should give too. Yeah.
Marketing campaign. Do you know of any crowdfunding sites, or is it normal to show any analytic traffic, demographics going to your crowdfunding part on that site? Then you can maybe market towards more of those types of people.
Where it's coming from, yeah. I mean, another thing you can do, let's say branding is important to you, is you could actually buy a URL and have it redirect to your crowdfunding campaign. So actually the URL you put out there is different, and you could attach that to Google Analytics, and then you would get that information. So you can jerry-rig it yourself. Yeah.
How does your platform work? Do we have just one page, one definition, one text, or we can be updating?
Yeah, you can update it. I mean,
information daily.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was one thing I was saying you should check out when you're choosing a platform. If you have something that you want to be updating, make sure they allow you to do that. Ours does that. Our site is we give more micro sites versus a lot of the other campaign sites out there are more a donation page with tabs. So ours you can actually build out 6 pages, and you can customize the names, and there are unique URLs within each page.
In my case, I would be giving every day new samples of what I would be selling in the future.
Well, and I guess you would want to think about if you really want to do that on your campaign page, or if that's something you want to do in social media or in your newsletter. And you want to think about how that's going to serve your purpose of raising the money. You need to make sure there's a connection, not just that you want to put the information out there. Okay, so when you're putting together your marketing strategy, this is a checklist, kind of putting together your campaign site. So just thinking about who your target audience is and kind of how you want to break that down, and who those key influencers are. So that's what we were talking about before, that network and how you're going to get to your friends' friends' friends. That's your goal. What marketing vehicles do these people frequent, right? So what is the best way to connect with them? So obviously your best ROI is going to be online, but, that would be email and social media, but what else, right? Do you have a population that responds to flyers, to posters, to postcards, to letters, to text messages, to phone calls with a follow-up email, right? That's something you're going to have to figure out.
Do postcards with information to campaigns work? In terms of just thinking personally what we're working on, if we went and made postcards and put it in rehearsal studios and drama bookshops and things like that.
That could be interesting. I mean, I was thinking about it more for a donor base that was already connected to you.
Okay.
I don't know. You have to really think about if it's an audience that would engage with that. So, for example, we had a campaign that was a grassroots campaign in Harlem, started by a bunch of parents who were frustrated with some hate speech messaging at this Atla church. And so they started off just creating a campaign to kind of speak out and say, this is not what we stand for, and, raise your voice and donate money, and then it's going to go to the Ali Forney Center. And then it got so much attention that they turned it actually into an in-person event and sold tickets and the whole thing. And they knew that their audience, that their neighborhood, Harlem is like a really kind of in-person, kind of feet-on-the-street neighborhood, so she made postcards. And the night of the event, somebody actually came in, they had taken a picture of the, not postcards, poster. Somebody had taken a picture of the poster and came in and gave $1,000 because he had been walking by and he's like, oh yeah, this is something close to my heart and I don't like this hate speech in my neighborhood and I've got kids, and he just walked in and donated. So, but she was a consummate community organizer and she really understood her neighborhood. So I think you would need to think about the type of people who frequent the places you're talking about. Would they pick up something like that and actually respond to it? Or would it work better if you partnered with the bookstore or the rehearsal studio and got them to send something out to their email list about you? Right? Maybe strategic partnership would work better because you're basically getting their endorsement and getting them to be an advocate for you. But, yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier about how when you initiate a crowdfunding campaign, which then sometimes sort of ends up have the opportunity to actually create an event around it.
Mm-hmm.
What if you have an inventory, and do you think it's a good idea to actually you could say run a crowdfunding campaign also at the same time? Do you think it would actually be a distraction? Or
No, well, I mean, we can talk about the details of what you're thinking separately, but one thing that I believe is that people often get really focused on just like a specific event, and you can actually use that as an excuse for a larger campaign. So that's like one thing. Actually, you're bringing up an interesting point, which is that, especially like in the organizational world, people often think that crowdfunding is like a separate campaign, that it's like this kind of one-off thing. But actually, any fundraising initiative you're doing should have an online social home base at this point. You're missing out if you don't. So you want to integrate things, right? That you want to look at your whole, like, what are your fundraising initiatives for the year, and what does your marketing communications look like? Like, often in organizations, you find there's a development department and a marketing department. They don't necessarily talk to each other, and it's so critical because as supporters, you're getting messages from a group. You don't know that they're coming from two different departments, so you need that kind of thing integrated. And so the same thing for, like, if they normally do like an event, right? But events are great, but they typically only can draw like a certain group of people. But when you're crowdfunding, one of the things about crowdfunding that's neat is that it allows you to open up the virtual doors on your campaign. Now you can market it to, if it's a New York-based event, you could actually market it to your entire list, which could be all over the country or all over the world, without fear that you're alienating people, because basically you're saying, hey, we're raising money for this thing, we're having this event. If you can come, great, click here to buy your ticket. And if you can't, you can still click here and offer your support. So I think it's a way to really make things more integrated. All right, so when you're coming up with your marketing plan, make sure that you've got a mass and a one-to-one strategy. So that's what we were talking about, like working your mass audience and working those interpersonal relationships. And then lastly, ask yourself, have I actually taken the time to make a promotional calendar? I think there's two ways to go about it. One is you could use like Excel and just make columns and kind of like label the weeks and sort of what do you want the desired outcome of each week to be, and what are some of your like goals and tactics. I found for me, I kind of like doing it in PowerPoint. Each slide is like a week, but basically you just want to map it out. This we've been talking about a lot. Basically, it's just, about cultivating your network early and often. I like to think of your network as like the rings of a bullseye. So you start with that inner circle of key supporters, and then you go out from there, and how do you get from like one ring to the next to the next? But the key thing here is don't be this guy, right? You don't want to be a one-man band. You want to be the leader, the conductor of the orchestra with a bunch of people helping to beat the drum with you. And I think you can kind of think about them as your online street team, right? So you can send out emails. I mean, part of this like recruitment and cultivating your network is sending out emails to people and saying, hey, I'm going to be doing this. Will you be part of my online street team? Here's what that would mean. right? And maybe you don't need them to do everything, but it might be, we are going to be posting on Facebook every day. I need 20 people who are going to always be looking out for our posts and clicking like and commenting. Why? Because the Facebook algorithm relies on interactivity to get your post to appear in a feed. And if you don't have anyone commenting, they die. Right? So that might be like a job you could give people that's really easy, right? Or part of being part of your online street team could be, if I give you a script to send out to your friends, 3 times during the campaign, would you do it? Yes, I'll do it. Great. I'll follow up with you and get that information to you. So just think about what you can do to organize people to work on your behalf. Does anyone, well, jumping ahead, does anyone know what a soft launch is as I reveal the information? All right, it's a pre-launch. Basically, the whole point of the soft launch is that you don't want to launch with a zero balance. So when you think about the duration of your campaign and kind of like what that marketing roadmap looks like, you need to make sure you leave yourself a few days or a week to do a soft launch. You want to try and get your thermometer to rise like 15 to 20% before you start to market this in a mass way. Giving begets giving. People want to give to campaigns that look like the team to be on. It's not the opposite where people, you might think, they say, oh, poor them, they don't have any money, I want to give it to them. Right? They're thinking, why isn't anyone giving to them? I don't want to give them my money, nobody else is doing it. That's the crowd part, that's the herd. It's not the mass messaging, it's the psychological thing that makes people want to follow along. Crowdfunding is a lot like high school. People just want to do what everyone else is doing. So use the soft launch period to micromanage that, basically, right? Like I told you guys that story in the beginning of, did I tell this story? About the whole setting a goal and lining up your donors? Tell you guys, or maybe that was on my lunch and lunch day. So I've known people who will set a goal, line up their donors for the soft launch, open up their campaign and say it's live, contact those donors, they all give within 10 minutes, they beat their goal, and then they issue a press release saying, we blew past our goal in 10 minutes. Right? It was completely contrived. This happens all the time. You've got to give yourself a running start. So you really need to think about what does it mean to get momentum in the beginning. If you don't do that, the campaign just runs the risk of falling flat. Make it easy for people to share, so I encourage you to make a marketing toolkit. So these people who say they're going to help be your advocates, write scripts, write tweets for them, write blurbs, have a press release link handy, have your thank you script handy for yourself, whatever it might be. This would be for both the people who initially say that they'll be part of your team, quote unquote, but also every time somebody donates, you're going to send that thank you script and you're going to ask them if they'll help share. And then depending on their response, you'll see if you need to give them something. So they might say, oh yeah, I just forwarded your campaign to a bunch of friends, or I posted it to Facebook. And you'll say, great. And then also you're going to follow up with them a week later or maybe one more time and see if you can get them to do anything else. And you're going to feel a little bit pushy, right? I mean, you always want to almost be on the border of feeling embarrassed because it's got to be a little bit uncomfortable. And have the tools ready, and so you could follow up and say, hey, really appreciate the support you've given us so far. We're trying to get to this next milestone. If I gave you a script, would you email it out to all your contacts? And then if they say yes, you better be ready. You got to have that script to give to them. So that's the whole idea of creating that marketing toolkit. So this is an example of how your marketing plan can manifest into an integrated marketing plan. Right? So this is actually that woman who it started off as just an online campaign, and she really did all the pieces of it. Press, outreach, plus she was a blogger. I don't think I have that on here. She posted all the time on Facebook, a lot of acknowledgments, a lot of appreciation, because you're looking for excuses to talk. And you can't just every time you post something, give me money. Or I've known people to get very down in the dumps, and they'll post things and don't do this. Why isn't anyone giving?
No.
For real. Don't say that. You gotta stay positive, right? Posters, Facebook page, campaign site, you gotta create like this whole trifecta of integrated marketing vehicles. And then have that appreciation strategy, right? How are you gonna turn people into your advocates? Make sure that people feel appreciated, curb that buyer's remorse, and do that by reporting back on impact, on progress, calling them out, making them feel good, like they just did something that was worthwhile. And that's something I think that matters for any campaign, but especially in a donation-based campaign. It's like there's karma, right? People give for feel-good purposes. It doesn't actually take that much to make somebody feel good. It's often just acknowledgement. And with that, I'm just going to kind of go through some like case studies, just how are people using donation-based crowdfunding? Yeah?
Is there a specific benefit to sending out QR codes leading to your...
In what way are you envisioning using it?
Well, because you talked about like having posters or like sending out postcards and like having the URL on it. Would it, I don't know if there's like a statistic that would be more beneficial to having a QR code rather than like a long URL.
I think it depends on the audience you're targeting.
Okay.
Like and that's that whole idea of like know your target market.
Right.
If you know you've got an audience that's like techie and probably skews pretty young, that would be into that,
Right.
then do it, especially if it's easy, right?
Right.
But, if you've got people who wouldn't really care about that, then it doesn't really, it's not worth your effort.
Okay.
Right? Because you're always figuring out, like, where do you want to put your efforts?
Right.
So, just some different ideas, and I think this should resonate with a lot of people in the room. So, this is like a startup nonprofit, right? These people didn't even have a website, so they like the idea of actually a more robust campaign site, but it also works very well to integrate with your website. Benefits, galas, tournaments is a great way to do, donation-based crowdfunding and really add like an interactive twist to something that's kind of been like a staid old way of doing things. We're going to kind of go in and out of the personal and organizational, but like memorial funds are a big one, right? People just, that's where certain things like this, like memorial funds and medical expense funds, those kind of fall outside the realm of all the preparation that you need to do, right? Something that's hyper emotional is going to carry itself a little bit more. But that's why for most of the types of things that you guys are talking about, you have to create the emotion, right? And so you need more of the time. But if somebody dies or there's, baby's born at 24 weeks, that is the story. And you can get those things up quickly. You don't have to worry about your network. You just put it up and get it out there. Educational appeals. Schools are great for this kind of thing just because, they've all been kind of doing it in such an old school way for so long that this is a great way to sort of invigorate their fundraising. But I think for any organization that you're connected to that has been doing things in an old way, this is, crowdfunding is cool because it is a low cost, high reward way to try something new and dip your toe. I think, sites like Kickstarter and just really the whole rewards-based fundraising, crowdfunding movement has fundamentally changed what people have come to expect in how you ask for and give money. That's how come it's trickled over into the donation-based space, right? People are expecting a different user experience, right? And so it's worth it to use something like this because you should be able to get a lot more donations because people are feeling engaged. And so it's interesting how sort of the more like e-commerce non-donations world, which is less of the pie than the donation-based space, is really, because it's more flashy and sexier, that's spilled over. And at this point, there's no going back. We're all socially networked, right? And we've all become accustomed to being asked to give money in this kind of more fun, it's not going away. Specific needs are a great way to use it, right? you can use it for annual funds and things like that, but anytime you can tell like a very specific story, a very specific kind of cause and effect, it's going to work better for you. So special programs, holiday kind of campaigns, service trips and mission trips is a big one, right? So this is kind of often for organizations but driven by individuals. And these are the types of things where, I mean, a lot of these campaigns, I hear this a lot actually, that when you do a nice job with your site and you do a good push with your social media, people often are surprised by the people who donate. That it's often people that like you haven't heard from in a really long time. Somebody told me recently that one of their first donors was somebody who fired them 3 years before, and they forgot that they were friends with them on Facebook. Right? So part of this, as you're preparing your network, is like mine your contacts. Like go look at your whole LinkedIn list. Go look at your Facebook list, right? And think about how you can work those things, and then some things just kind of, happen by accident. But one thing I would say with that whole idea of like communicating on the border of discomfort, but like in a smart way, again, don't be whiny and don't always ask for money. But somebody recently told me, she goes, this long lost friend of mine was crowdfunding for like a poetry project, and she kept posting about it, and like for the most part, people, they ignore you. That's why you have to have a thick skin and like understand the principle of persistence behind crowdfunding. She said, but she won me over because it sounds kind of trite, but she said her passion won me over. She posted about it so often, and her reasons for why this mattered to her wasn't just like, here's my campaign again, everyone, don't forget about my campaign. She was like giving them real reasons why this mattered. She's like, so after I saw it like 7 times, I threw her some money. And that falls into the principle of advertising, which is that you need to be hit with a message about 5 to 7 times before you take action, right? That's why Coca-Cola invests in, so much advertising, because you see a TV ad and an online ad and radio, and then you see, somebody in Us Weekly drinking the newest Coke and whatever, and it's surround sound that finally gets you to take action. So don't forget that, because it's really easy to want to give up where you feel like enough already. No one's listening to me. They're listening to you, right? It just takes them a little while. Special events. This is for a food bank. Animal rescue. Annual campaigns. This is immigration and refugee work, conferences. You can even crowdfund conferences. So if you have an idea for like a conference you want to do and you want to get it off the ground, that could be like a really interesting way to like sell tickets for it and get people. If you have enough people who want to go and they help you raise the money, then the conference happens. And then other than that, just a couple of like creative ideas. This would apply probably a little bit more to people who are, at formal organizations, but, really sort of this idea of like, how do you move past the old way of doing things, right? So one way is ditch the offline response card. Like, don't make it easy for people to give offline. Force them to give online, because you're going to get more out of it, right? It's not just the donation. You want them to share. There's no pass-along rate on a letter, right? Not like a magazine. It goes in the garbage. They either give or they don't, right? Online, you can get in front of people over and over again, and as soon as they give, you now have permission to ask them to share. And the other piece is really like creating extensions of existing pipelines, right? So this, again, is kind of more for organizations, but like if you have a lot of older donors, right, and you're trying to sort of get new people into the pipeline, or maybe a subset of people that doesn't have a ton of money, but in aggregate they each gave a certain amount could do something. Think about how you can use crowdfunding in a creative way to motivate people. And with that, I've gotten through everything now. I know that was a lot of information, and I want to open it up for questions now. But the goal of this presentation is really meant to empower you. I know sometimes people walk away and they're like, this, wow, can I do it? And I think that once you take a second to, digest the information. It's really meant to give you the steps so that you know what you're doing now, right? And you all can do this. It's not rocket science. It's just strategy and planning. So, does anyone have any other questions or campaigns or projects that they're thinking about that now they sort of have some ideas they want to talk about?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How effective would you say press releases are for the crowdfunding campaign?
Like press releases that you pay for or free PR sites?
Free, like writing a press release, contacting local papers, like all sorts of things about what you're doing.
If you have the bandwidth to invest in media, like in trying to create relationships with journalists, it's definitely worthwhile, you know? And that's why, like, you don't necessarily have to spend money on a press release, right? And, like, pay PR web. You could use one of the free press release websites just so that you have a link, so that through your network, if you get journalistic contacts, you have something that's really easy to share. But, I mean, if you've got someone on your team who actually has the time and the wherewithal to reach out to journalists and give them a valuable story, absolutely, because they're really hungry for this kind of information. But it may not make sense for every kind of campaign. And I would also say that for people who are like, whoa, PR, like, I don't have time for that, that's not a showstopper, right? A showstopper is if you don't have your network in order. Whether or not you can do PR is, you know, up to the type of campaign you want to do. It's great value add though. Be careful about who you give your money to, right? Because a lot of crowdfunding is, you can do it yourself, right? But there are pieces where you do need people or can use people, and that's why I would defer more to Alex to talk from a resource perspective, but I would say is just, you know, be careful. You know, there are a lot of not nice people who basically go around to crowdfunding sites trying to find campaigns and proposition people, saying, oh, well, we're going to help you get blah, 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 you know, this many people to give, this many followers, and, you know, a lot of times I hear stories they just take your money, you know, because also when you're pushing a campaign out, you need to be authentic, like it needs to come from you. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not find a great resource to help you, like, you know, Alex's team helps people with their strategy. You know, you might want someone, if you really think it's important to invest in a good video. Like, you just need to, like, remember we were talking about strategic objectives and, like, you're trying to raise money, but what else are you trying to do? You need to be really clear on what you're trying to get out of the campaign to figure out how you want to invest your resources. Do you guys have any other questions? You have another one?
Yeah, one more. How long does it take normally to prepare for a campaign? Like, typically?
It's really arranged, right? Because some people are just really good at writing. They have an image ready. They already have a network. They're ready to go. Other people, you know, if you're working with a team, you may, like, work on it for a week or two. I mean, the actual, like, physical process of doing it is really easy, right? They're templates. We put you through a setup wizard, upload your picture here, fill in this information. But, you know, depending on who you are, what you're trying to achieve, who your group is, you may need a certain amount of time to marinate on it, edit. And then, you know, if you are honest with yourself about, do you have the network to really do what you want to do, you might say, yeah, we're ready to go now. Or you might say, you know what, I need a month to start seeding the idea with people. Or I need 6 months. Like it, and that will just kind of depend. I know that's a little bit vague, but hopefully it corroborates everything else we've been talking about. Yeah.
Can I get a little sense of the celebrity factor? Are there celebrities involved in some of this? And is it something they're embracing and getting behind, or are they staying away from it? You know, in the world of donating through this method.
Well, I mean, I think, like, you see that a lot in rewards-based campaigns, right? Like, just, and that happens a lot more on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, too. I think, like, you know, doing big films or, you know, like, you're seeing a lot of big names take to these platforms because one of their strategic objectives is marketing, like, pre-marketing the film or pre-marketing the album. They want to get buy-in, so they're using that as a way to do that. So I think there's celebrity there. Probably in fashion a little. I know you mentioned fashion. But I think in the donation-based space, I don't know that it's really any different than how organizations and nonprofits have been working in general, right? Like, I think if anytime you can get somebody who's high profile associated with your cause, that's helpful, right? Because either you can put your face on it, that's a nice endorsement, legitimacy. In the world of social media, it probably means that they've got a lot of Twitter followers or nice Facebook page or an email list, but you have to use it well, because I'll tell you, we had a campaign that I thought was going to be really promising. It's like a homegrown, family-run nonprofit for pediatric cancer in the name of this little girl who died, and they do this swim-a-thon, and they got a famous U.S. Olympic swimmer to like put his name on their campaign, and I kept saying to them, have you made an agreement with him on how this is going to play out? Like, how often is he going to tweet for you? Is he going to put this on his website? Is he going to put this on his Facebook page? Like, have a plan. And I think they were so afraid of bothering him because he came like through this guy's brother. He's actually like the spokesperson for his like beef jerky company, and then he just said he would do it because it's his niece. And so they didn't get anything formalized, and actually didn't work very well. And the reason is because there was like no plan. Like, this guy tweeted about it a few times. Not bad on him, but like, he didn't really know what he was supposed to do, and he's high profile, but he doesn't really have a team of handlers, right? So it was kind of just like up to him. So I think, yeah, it can help, but like with anything else, you have to have a plan, you gotta have a strategy, you need to set expectations with people, like same with asking them to be on your online street team. Will you be on my online street team? Yeah, sure, I'll do that. People will say yes. Let me tell you what that means to me, and let me know if you can commit to this. Ideally, I would like you to do this, 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 and this. And they go, oh, whoa. Say, okay, if you could pick one thing, you know, which one would you do? And like, a lot of this stuff, it means you have to talk to someone. You might have to pick up the phone. You might have to, you know, do an email exchange. And people think a lot of this is like fast and loose, like quick, this, this, this. It's not, right? So same thing with the celebrity factor. Yeah.
Would you advise someone to be without the product already developed? Would you advise to put the project on the site already, or wait for the product to be already built?
I think it really comes down to like, what's your financial approach to it, right? So like, if you want to crowdfund for people to help you get a prototype, then you don't necessarily need the product, but I would say you'd have to have like a pretty good network of people who would be interested in helping you get to that first level. And you have to make a pretty solid case for like why they should be, you know, investing in that. I think, you know, you can do it in a phased approach. You could do like crowdfund to the prototype level, crowdfund from prototype to production, you know, and maybe your rewards vary. I mean, this is more rewards based. Like, you couldn't do that donation based, right? Like, businesses are not karmic, so you got to give people something. Anyone else have any questions? I know this has gone on a little bit longer than planned. If anyone wants a copy of the slides, take my card, send me an email. I'm happy to send that to you, and happy to hang around and answer any individual questions. Alex, do you want to, or Eric, do you want to do any wrap-ups? And there's a postcard back there with the code, so be sure to grab that in case you want to free.
Speaking about the slides, we're also taping the event. So if anyone wants the video, we'll post it on the meetup. Also, you can give a card or write email to Eric in the back, and we'll email to you the whole presentation. First of all, let's thank Dan for the event today. So let's give a hand applause. So my name is Alex Feldman. I didn't have a chance to introduce myself in the beginning. I'm the CEO of Crowds Unite. So Crowds Unite is a website which is a resource for crowdfunding. We're the biggest review site in the world for crowdfunding platforms. So we have, you know, hundreds of reviews for sites like, you know, Deposit Gift or Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And we help businesses with initial steps of crowdfunding and connect them to marketing people like we talked just previously. So if you have questions, feel free to contact me. My information is in the back. And we do these events every single month. Next month, we actually have a real estate crowdfunding CEO speak about real estate crowdfunding. So if you're interested in that, please stop by next month. And feel free to stay in network. Thank you.